Snow stung Silas Greywolf's face the way truth stings a man who has tried too long to hide from it. The wind pushed across the Bitterroot Mountains in long, angry breaths, lifting loose powder from the ground and swirling it into the pale morning light. He had woken early the way men who live alone often do, and stepped outside to split a few logs before the storm reached its teeth. Then he heard it. A single scream cutting through the trees like a torn thread snapping under weight. High, sharp, desperate, Silas froze mid-swing axe suspended above the round of pine. Sound carried strangely up here, bending between cliffs and timber. It could have been an animal. Could have been the mountain playing tricks the way it sometimes whispered your fears back to you. But the second scream came clearer, trembling human, and far too thin to belong to someone who still had hope. Silas let the axe fall into the snow and grabbed his rifle. His heartbeat rose quick at first, then steady like the steps of a man used to danger. He moved fast toward the tree line, boots cracking through crusted snow, breath leaving soft clouds in the cold. The sound came again. Closer now. Weak. He crossed a frozen creek, climbed a low ridge, and pushed through a curtain of branches. What he saw made his stomach tighten into a knot he had not felt in years. A girl, barely alive. She was tied to a broken fence post at the edge of an old grazing patch no one used anymore. Her wrists were bound with rusty wire that had cut deep enough to leave dark streaks on the wood behind her. Snow had gathered on her shoulders like she had been there all night. The bruises on her face were fresh. A thin dress clung to her skin, torn in places by the wind. Her head hung forward, black hair matted with snowflakes. When she lifted her face at the sound of his approach, her eyes looked empty first, then frightened, then almost relieved. Almost. Silas stepped closer slowly, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. He kept his rifle lowered. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Please don't." He stopped a few feet away. "I won't hurt you." She wet her lips, though there was no moisture left on them. "People say that. Before they do." Silas had heard many things in his life. That one cut deeper than he expected. "My name is Silas Greywolf," he said. "I live up the ridge. I heard you calling." She blinked confused, then winced when the wire dug into her skin. "I wasn't calling. I was dying." Silas didn't answer. Words were useless right now. He reached for his knife. She tried to pull back, instinct more than strength. Her entire body trembled. "Don't touch me." "You're freezing," he said. "If I leave you here, you'll be gone in 10 minutes. She swallowed hard. Her breath shivered out of her. She went still. Silas cut the wire from her wrists first. Her hands fell forward like dead weight. Then he cut the strands around her chest and waist. When the last piece came loose, her knees buckled. Silas caught her before she hit the snow. She was lighter than she looked. Too light. Like someone who had gone hungry a long time. He lifted her into his arms. She didn't fight, only whispered something soft he couldn't hear. Her head rested against his shoulder as he walked up the ridge, footing sure from years of climbing the same slope. Wind whipped at them. Branches clawed at his coat. The girl's breathing came shallow and thin, each one sounding like it might be the last. Silas had carried bodies before, none of them alive. None of them asking without asking to be saved. When he reached his cabin, he pushed the door open with his shoulder. Warmth hit them. The fire from earlier was still burning low in the stone hearth. He laid her on a pile of blankets near it. The moment her skin met the wool, her body shook violently, shaking with the pain of returning heat. "Easy," he said quietly. "This part is always the worst." She tried to curl into herself, but winced at the movement. Silas grabbed another blanket and set it over her. He poured water from a kettle, warmed it, then held it to her lips. She recoiled. "No. No more tricks." "It's water," he said. "Nothing else." She hesitated, then drank. A little at first, then more. When she finished, she let her head fall back. For a long moment the cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of her exhausted breaths. "What's your name?" Silas asked. She stared at the ceiling. "May. Just May. No last name." "Not yet." Silas sat on a wooden stool, elbows on his knees. He wanted to ask who had tied her up, who had beaten her, who had left her to die. But he knew the look of someone not ready to speak their truth. She shivered again, pulling the blanket tighter. "Why'd you help me?" she whispered. Silas looked at the fire instead of her. "Because someone didn't help my sister when she needed it." May slowly turned her head, studying him. There was something searching in her eyes, like she was trying to decide whether he was speaking the truth or hiding behind it. "Where's she now?" May asked. Silas didn't answer. The question filled the cabin with a heaviness that had lived with him for years. May closed her eyes. Her voice dropped to a breath. "I didn't think anyone would find me." Silas stared at the flames. "Most folks don't come this far up the mountain. So why were you out there?" He hesitated. "Sometimes the mountain lets you hear what you need to hear." May didn't know what to make of that, but she seemed too tired to question it. Silas stood and added another log to the fire. He watched her fight sleep, her eyelids drooping, her fingers twitching. She was scared to close her eyes, scared of what might be waiting on the other side. "You're safe," he said quietly. Her breathing slowed. For a moment her face softened. Then she whispered something that didn't sound meant for him at all. He said the storm would finish what he started. Silas's jaw tightened. Whoever he was, the truth behind that sentence carried the weight of cruelty practiced too long. May drifted into a restless sleep. Silas stayed beside her, watching the firelight flicker against the log walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind howled again. But it wasn't the same scream he had heard earlier. This one sounded angrier, colder, like the mountain knew trouble was coming. Silas reached for his rifle and leaned it beside the stool. If someone had left May to die, they might be looking to make sure the job was done. He didn't know the girl. He didn't know her past. But he knew enough. Someone had tried to erase her. Someone thought no one would find her. Silas looked at the sleeping girl wrapped in blankets. Fragile. Hurt. Alive. "Not this time," he muttered. As the snow began to fall heavier outside, Silas realized something he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The storm didn't break until late the next morning. Heavy snow packed itself against the windows of Silas Greywolf's cabin, muting the world outside to a soft, eerie hush. The mountain had a way of holding its breath after a night like that, as if waiting to see who survived and who didn't. Silas had barely slept. He'd kept the fire alive, fed May water when she stirred, changed out the damp cloth on her forehead, and sat in the old wooden chair across from her, with his rifle on his knee. He told himself it was habit. Truth was something about the girl felt like a thin thread tying him to a past he'd spent years trying to cut loose. May woke slowly, blinking into the warm shadows of the cabin, like someone not entirely convinced she was still alive. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled from the effort. "Easy," Silas said, setting a hand near her shoulder but not touching her. "You'll fall over." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for danger. Where am I in my cabin?" "Bitterroot Ridge." "How long?" "Since yesterday morning." "You were half frozen." May pulled the blanket tighter around her. "Did you stay up all night?" Silas didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the metal cup from the table beside her and poured warm water. When he offered it, she hesitated, then took it carefully, both hands shaking. He waited until she finished before he said, "You want something to eat?" She nodded, then shook her head. Then nodded again, like she couldn't decide what her body needed. Silas warmed some broth and set the bowl beside her. May stared at it like she hadn't seen real food in weeks. Maybe she hadn't. She took a small sip. Another. Then suddenly her hand slipped and the broth sloshed over the rim. She flinched and dropped the bowl, breathing sharply, as if expecting a blow to follow. Silas didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't react at all. "It's just soup," he said gently. "The floor's seen worse." May blinked fast, then lowered her head like she was embarrassed for having reacted. Silas crouched, picked up the bowl, and refilled it. When he placed it back near her, she didn't touch it. "You can eat when you're ready," he said. May looked at him a long time. "Why are you being kind to me?" He took a seat on the stool across from her. "You needed help." "That's not a reason," she said quietly. "Strangers don't do that." "Not up here." Silas studied her. The bruises, the torn dress, the deep, exhausted fear in her voice. He could have lied, but lies were useless to a girl who'd seen too many of them. "My sister needed help once," he said. "I didn't give it." May lifted her head. What happened to her? Silas exhaled a slow breath that carried years of weight. "She died." May's throat moved as she swallowed. "I'm sorry." "So am I." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Outside, wind brushed against the wooden slats of the cabin, like fingers trailing across old wounds. May finally asked, "Does she haunt you?" Silas's gaze drifted to the window, up toward the ridge where the trees stood, stripped by winter. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said, "but I do believe in regrets that never leave your sit." May looked at her hands, the raw cuts on her wrists. "I know what that feels like." Silas hesitated. "May, who tied you to that fence, who?" Her body stiffened. Her breath hitched. She pulled the blanket tighter, as if that alone could protect her from the memory. She didn't answer. Silas waited. "You didn't rush someone speaking their hurt. You let it come when it came." Instead of answering, May whispered a different truth. "I don't want to go back." "You're not going back," Silas said. "You don't know him." Silas's jaw hardened. "I don't need to." She looked at him again, searching, measuring how much she could trust him, maybe trying to see what kind of man saves a stranger from a storm. Before she could say more, a loud crack came from outside, the sound of something heavy snapping under weight. May flinched so hard, the blanket slipped from her shoulders. Silas stood, rifle already in his hand. "Stay here." May's eyes widened. "No, don't leave me alone." Silas paused. "I'm right outside the door." "No farther." He stepped out onto the porch, boots sinking into the new snow. The cold hit him instantly, but the air carried something else, tracks. Fresh ones. Human. He crouched and examined them. They led from the tree line to the edge of his clearing. The prince had circled the cabin sometime during the night. Someone had come looking. Silas scanned the ridge, eyes narrowing. The trees stood still, but the quiet felt wrong, the kind of wrong that sits in a man's bones, a warning that trouble is close and waiting. He tightened his grip on the rifle, then returned inside. May sat upright, breathing hard. "What was it, Tracks?" he said. Someone came through, her face drained of what little color she had. "He found me." Silas studied her expression, saw real terror there, not fear. Terror. "Who?" he asked again. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "My father." Silas felt the floor tilt in a way it hadn't in years. Not from surprise, he'd suspected a man capable of tying his daughter to a fence wasn't far behind, but from how she said father, like the word itself was a threat. "May," he said carefully. "The man who did this, he'll come back," she said. "He always does." Silas lowered the rifle. He sat back on the stool. His voice softened, but his resolve sharpened like a blade. "Not here. Not while you're under my roof." May shook her head. "You don't understand. He doesn't stop." "Then he picked the wrong mountain," Silas said. She looked at him like she wanted to believe him. Needed to. But survival had taught her doubt. Silas leaned back. "You said he left you there to die." May nodded, shaking. "Why?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "Because he said I reminded him of my mother. And because I finally told him I wouldn't take the beatings anymore." Her voice wavered. "He said the storm would finish me, that no one would find me." Silas looked at the fire. Storm didn't get the chance. May's eyes flicked to him. Why were you even outside? Silas thought of Mary, of the last time he heard her call his name, of how he didn't listen. "Sometimes the mountain lets you hear what you need to hear," he said again. May didn't understand the meaning, but she felt the weight of it. She pulled the blanket closer and stared at the fire. "So, what happens now?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, thinking, measuring the danger. Tracks in the snow meant they didn't have long. "We get you well," he said finally. "Then we go see someone who can help." May frowned. "Who?" He thought of the woman down the valley, the only person he trusted with wounds deeper than skin. Annie Snowbear. May leaned back, exhausted but calmer. "And after that," Silas's gaze darkened. "After that, we figure out why your father thinks he can hunt you." May stared into the fire again. She whispered something so faint he almost didn't hear it. "He won't stop until I'm dead." Silas stood and checked the window again, the memory of those tracks still fresh in his mind. "Then he and I are due for a conversation." The wind swept across the ridge, rattling the cabin door, as if something outside was testing its strength. May shivered. Silas loaded his rifle. By the time the storm cleared 2 days later, May could walk across the cabin without collapsing. Her wrists, still raw and scabbed, shook each time she tried to hold the cup Silas gave her. But she insisted on doing things herself, even if her fingers trembled or she spilled water more than she drank it. Silas didn't offer to help unless she asked. The third morning, he saddled his mule and packed supplies. "We're going down the ridge," he said. May looked up from the tin plate of biscuits she hadn't touched. "Where?" "To someone who knows how to help." "I don't want help." Silas tightened the straps. too late. May stood wrapped in a thick coat he gave her. If this is some preacher or lawman, it's not. Then who? He met her eyes. An old friend. Annie Snowbear. She's a healer. May flinched at the word, like it hurt more than her ribs. I'm not broken, she muttered. Didn't say you were. Then why? Because healing ain't about being broken, Silas said. It's about giving yourself permission to stop bleeding. May looked away, jaw clenched. I'm fine. You're not, he said. But you will be, if you let yourself. The trail down the mountain was rough and cold. Snow crunched under hooves and boots, and ice glistened like glass between trees. Silas kept May ahead of him on the mule just in case she slipped. She didn't speak the whole way, only winced when the wind cut sharp and pulled the collar tighter around her face. They reached Annie's homestead by noon. The house was nestled in a hollow between two ridges, built from wide logs and softened by time. Smoke curled gently from a crooked chimney. Wind chimes made of bone and tin sang in the wind. On the porch sat a rocking chair, empty but still moving. She's Crow, Silas said, helping May down. Midwife, widow, scares grown men more than bears do. May raised an eyebrow. Sounds charming. Silas smiled faintly. She's earned it. The door opened before they knocked. Annie Snowbear stood in the doorway with a ladle in one hand and an unimpressed expression on her face. Well, she said, you finally crawled out from under your rock, Silas Grey Wolf. Silas nodded. Didn't crawl. Walked. You still grumpy? He didn't answer. Annie's eyes moved past him to May, who stood stiffly beside the mule, one hand gripping the saddle like she needed the earth to stop spinning. Annie's expression softened, not pity, but recognition. Bring her in, she said, and don't track snow all over my floor. Inside, the warmth hit like a blanket. The place smelled of sage smoke and something sweet bubbling on the stove. Dried herbs hung from the rafters in neat bundles, and jars lined the shelves, each labeled in Annie's neat, sharp handwriting. May stayed near the door. Silas hung his coat, then took a seat by the fire. Sit, girl, Annie said, nodding toward the chair across from Silas. I don't bite unless provoked. May hesitated, then sat, eyes never leaving the older woman. Name, Annie asked. May. Just May. Far as it matters. Annie smirked. Fair enough. She moved closer and crouched, peering at May's wrists, her face the way she held herself tight like wire. Who did it? May looked at the floor. My father. Annie didn't blink. He around? Not here, Silas answered. He planning to be, probably. Annie stood. Then we've got work to do. The next few hours passed in quiet movements. Annie brought hot tea with willow bark crushed root into paste and gently wrapped May's wrists in clean gauze. May flinched once but didn't complain. When Annie checked her ribs, she only winced. She's bruised deep, Annie told Silas later out of earshot, but not broken. He nodded. Not on the outside. Annie gave him a long look. That's the easier part. That evening, May sat on the porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket. Snow fell again, light this time. The wind had calmed. Silas came out and handed her a carved wooden cup with steam rising from it. Drink it, he said. Helps with pain. She sniffed it. Smells like dirt. Tastes worse. She sipped anyway. Her face twisted, but she didn't spit it out. They sat in silence. Your sister May said suddenly. What was her name? Silas stared into the trees. Mary. May hesitated. What happened, he didn't speak right away. Then she was younger, quiet, like a shadow. When we left the reservation, I took work up north, left her with our father, promised I'd come back once I had money. May waited. I didn't come back fast enough. May didn't ask more. She didn't need to. They sat there until the sky darkened and the first wolf cry echoed far down the valley. Inside, Annie added wood to the fire, glanced out the window, and whispered to herself. Storm's not over. The next morning, May helped Annie crush herbs. Her hands still shook, but less than before. You ever work with plants? Annie asked. May shrugged. My mom did, before she passed. She teach you anything. May touched a sprig of dried mint, enough to know what healing looks like. Annie smiled. You're doing fine. May looked up. Do you think people like us ever get better? Not all at once, Annie said. But piece by piece, yes. The body heals faster than the soul, but both need someone to believe they're worth saving. May looked down at her hands. And if nobody does, then you find the ones who will. Outside, Silas tightened the straps on his mule again. He'd stayed longer than planned, but part of him knew why. Trouble didn't vanish, it followed blood-scent memory, and May Redbird's past wasn't done with her. He caught Annie's eye through the window. She nodded once as if to say she's strong enough to keep going, but not alone. That night, as May lay in the soft cot beside the hearth, she whispered to herself, "Don't leave." Silas, already packing to ride back to the cabin, paused at the door. "I'll be back," he said. "Promise?" He looked at her eyes, dark with memory. "If I break this one, I'll never make another." He stepped out into the cold, the shadows long under the trees, and behind him, inside the warm cabin, a girl who wasn't ready to hope just yet began to believe, maybe just maybe, she had been found for a reason. The saloon in Ellery wasn't much more than a leaning box of boards, stained windows, and the smell of old sweat soaked into the walls. But it was warm, and the whiskey didn't ask questions. That's why Thatcher Redbird liked it. He sat slouched at the far end of the bar, shoulders hunched, hat low thumb, circling the rim of a half-empty glass. His eyes were bloodshot, not from one long night, but from too many stacked on top of each other. Guilt and liquor had made a deal in his bones long ago, and these days the bottle always won. Behind him, conversation drifted between poker players and ranch hands. Snow tapped against the windows, soft but steady. A fire crackled in a stone hearth that hadn't been cleaned since spring. Another asked the bartender, a tired man with a belly like a whiskey barrel and a permanent scowl. Thatcher tapped the rim of his glass without looking up. "Make it 2." The bartender filled it, then leaned close. "You still looking for her?" Thatcher's jaw tightened. "She ran off with some mountain rat." "Not my fault." The bartender gave a non-committal grunt. "Girl didn't look like the running type." Thatcher turned slowly, his voice low and dangerous. "You calling me a liar, Bill? No. I'm saying maybe folks don't run unless they're chased." Thatcher stared at him a second longer, then snorted and downed the whiskey in one hard swallow. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and motioned for another. A voice cut in from behind. "I'd say you've chased enough things into the ground." Thatcher twisted on his stool. Jonah Greaves stood by the door, snow melting off his coat Bible under one arm, a look in his eyes that said he'd come to test his own courage. "Well," Thatcher said, smiling without warmth, "if it ain't the preacher without a pulpit." Jonah walked to the bar, but didn't sit. "Wasn't expecting to see you here, Redbird." "Where else would I be? My daughter ran off, remember?" Jonah folded his arms. "That what you're telling folks?" "It's what happened. She didn't run." Thatcher leaned back and laughed. You know something I don't, I know. May, Jonah said. I baptized her when she was 6. I've seen the bruises, Thatcher. The ones she wore like old clothes she couldn't take off. Thatcher's smile vanished. You talk a lot for a man who couldn't keep his own church open. Jonah didn't flinch. Doesn't take a pulpit to speak the truth. Thatcher stood slowly. He wasn't a big man, but he carried himself like someone who'd learned that fear was louder than fists. You're calling me a liar, preacher. I'm calling you a coward. The saloon went quiet. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thatcher chuckled low and bitter. You don't know what it's like having your own daughter look at you like you're the monster. You think I wanted her to turn out soft, to talk back, to run wild like her mother? Jonah shook his head. You didn't raise her to be strong, so when she found strength, you tried to beat it out of her. Thatcher took a step forward. Careful, preacher. I'm done being careful, Jonah said. She's not yours to hunt anymore. Thatcher sneered. Who says I'm hunting her? You're here, aren't you? Asking questions, telling stories, pouring guilt into your glass like you're the one who got left behind. Thatcher slammed his glass down, shards flying. A man who drinks his guilt long enough, Jonah said, eyes locked on him, starts to believe his daughter is the one who poured it. The room stayed silent. Thatcher breathed, heavy fists clenched. But he didn't swing. He didn't speak. He just turned and walked out, boots crunching snow as the saloon door creaked shut behind him. Jonah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The bartender gave him a slow nod of respect, then began cleaning up the glass. Outside, Thatcher stormed through the street. He pulled his coat tight, face red with fury and humiliation. He didn't like being cornered. And he sure as hell didn't like being seen. That's when he heard the footsteps. Not loud, measured, confident. A man leaned against the post outside the general store, dressed too fine for a town like Ellery. Black gloves, gray coat, a silver pin on his lapel. Trouble in the saloon? The man asked. Thatcher stopped. Who the hell are you? Name's Devlin. Marcus Devlin. Thatcher looked him up and down. What do you want? Devlin smiled. Heard you were looking for a girl. Thought you might need help. Thatcher narrowed his eyes. Why would you care? Devlin stepped forward, voice low and calm. Let's just say I have a history with people who think they can disappear without paying their debts. And I don't like when things go missing in my territory. She's not missing, Thatcher muttered. She's hiding. Same difference, Devlin said. You know where she is, no. But I got a good idea who's got her. Devlin nodded. Then I suggest we pay this man a visit. Thatcher squinted. And what do you get out of it? Devlin smiled with teeth too white for a man who did honest work. Control, order, and a message sent. Thatcher hesitated, then nodded slowly. He's a loner, mountain man, goes by Silas Greywolf, lives past Bitterroot Ridge. Devlin looked toward the snowy mountains in the distance. Sounds like we've got a trail to ride. That night, Jonah stood alone in his room above the chapel-turned shelter. He poured himself a coffee and stared out the window. He'd seen the look in Thatcher's eyes. Not grief, not confusion. Rage. Pure, ugly rage. The kind that didn't burn out, it festered. The kind that didn't want closure. It wanted revenge. Jonah opened his desk drawer and took out a folded map. He found Bitterroot Ridge. His gut told him what his mind didn't want to believe. The girl was still alive, and now the men looking for her were worse than the man who left her to die. He folded the map and tucked it into his coat. Tomorrow he'd ride. He didn't know if May was safe, but if Silas Grey Wolf was half the man folks said he was, then maybe, just maybe, there was still time to put a body between her and the bullet he knew was coming. Up in the mountains, May didn't sleep well. Her dreams were scattered, filled with fence posts and frozen ground. But somewhere inside the haze, she heard something: clear footsteps outside the cabin. Not now. Not yet. But soon. She sat upright in the cot. Breath sharp, heart pounding. Annie stirred from the rocker near the fire. "What is it?" May whispered. "He's coming." And somewhere out in the dark, Thatcher Redbird and Marcus Devlin rode together toward Bitterroot Ridge. They didn't come to take her back. They came to erase her. The snow on Bitterroot Ridge had started to melt in patches, turning hard drifts into slush and filling the deer tracks with water. Silas Grey Wolf rode slow, his mule sure-footed, as it picked a careful path through the steep trail toward the edge of Ellery. He'd made the trip for supplies, flour bullets, salt, but his mind wasn't on any of it. He couldn't shake the image of May Redbird's eyes when she'd whispered, "Don't leave." It wasn't just fear that had clung to her voice, it was history. Like trust was a candle someone had blown out too many times for her to believe in light. He tightened his coat against the wind. Something was shifting. He could feel it in the trees, in the way the crows circled lower than usual, in the weight of the silence that rode alongside him. He'd lived long enough on the mountain to know when something unnatural was approaching. And trouble, like weather, always sent word ahead if you were quiet enough to listen. By the time he reached Ellery, clouds were already gathering over the valley. He hitched the mule outside the general store and stepped inside, nodding to the shopkeep, whose eyes flicked nervously from Silas to the door and back again. "Grey Wolf," the man said. "You picked a hell of a time to ride in." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Something going on," the shopkeep leaned in. "Thatcher Redbird's in town. Came in 3 days ago. Not alone." Silas's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. "Who's with him, stranger? City type. Too clean, too calm. Name's Devlin. Word is he's got men of his own. They've been asking around. About a girl." Silas didn't speak. The shopkeep dropped his voice to a whisper. "You know anything about that?" Silas just said. "Pack me a double order. I won't be coming back soon." As he stepped back outside, the door creaked behind him. Across the street, 2 men leaned against the post outside the saloon watching him. Not locals. Not ranch hands either. Silas didn't slow. He walked straight to his mule, adjusted the straps, and rode out before the sky had a chance to crack open. On the trail back, the wind picked up. He wasn't just riding with supplies now. He was riding with time running out. Back at Annie Snowbear's homestead, May stood in the back garden, a basket in one hand, her coat flapping in the wind. She moved slowly, still favoring her ribs, but the swelling in her hands had gone down. The bruises were fading, but the ache inside, she didn't know what to call that, or when it would leave. Annie watched her from the porch, sipping coffee quiet. "You're getting stronger," she said finally. May didn't look back. "Only because I have to." "You think that's weakness?" May turned. "No. I think it's survival." Annie nodded. "Same thing sometimes." May walked up the porch steps, sat beside her. "What happens if he finds me?" Annie didn't answer right away. "Then he won't. Not if Silas gets to him first." May stared into the hills. "I don't want anyone dying for me." Annie's face softened. He's not dying for you. He's living for the first time in a long while. You just gave him the reason. May swallowed hard. That's a lot of weight to carry. It's not yours to carry. It's his choice. May whispered, but what if his choice kills him? Annie looked at her, then, let the mountain bury him proud. Inside, the fire crackled. The house smelled of cedar and healing herbs. But the shadows creeping under the windows were getting longer. Silas reached the ridge by dusk. Snow had started again, light but steady, like the sky was preparing to hide whatever was about to come. He didn't go straight to Annie's. Instead, he cut around the back trail, eyes sharp. He'd seen the way Devlin's men watched him in Ellery, and he didn't trust the fool that silence meant safety. At the northern edge of the ridge, he found what he expected: hoofprints. Fresh. 4 sets, headed west, toward the cabin. He followed them far enough to see where they split, 2 peeling off toward the river bend, another pair climbing the ridge. They weren't amateurs. They were circling. Silas crouched by the tracks, pulled his glove off, touched the snow. Still soft. They weren't far. He rose, loaded his rifle, and started back. His mule was too slow for what came next. He went on foot. By the time he reached Annie's, night was bleeding into the trees. She met him at the door. "They've been here," she said. "I know. They didn't knock, just watched from the trees." May appeared behind, her face pale. Silas stepped inside, checked the windows, then the corners. "You packed?" he asked. May nodded. "I didn't want to run." "You're not. We're moving." "Difference." Annie set a bundle near the hearth. "You'll take the high trail. Snow's thin there. Less chance they'll follow." Silas looked at her. "What about you? I'll be fine. You shouldn't be alone." Annie gave him a half smile. "Child, I've been alone longer than you've been brooding." He almost smiled back. Almost. May stepped forward. "Where are we going?" Silas paused. "There's a man south of the river. Marshal part Crow. Used to ride circuit law. Name's Hollis Brant. If we get to him, you'll be protected." May held his gaze. "And you, I don't run." "You're not leaving me again," she said. "Not now." Silas didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Annie. "Keep the fire low. Bolt the back door." Annie nodded once. "May the wind walk with you." Silas grabbed the rifle, handed May a pistol. Her hand shook when she took it. "I've never shot one," she whispered. "Point. Don't hesitate. Breathe after you pull the trigger, not before." May nodded. Her lips pressed into a line. Outside, the night deepened. The storm picked up. Snowflakes drifted sideways now. They left through the cellar door, slipping into the trees. Not fast. Careful. The kind of careful you use when the woods might whisper your name to someone you don't want to find you. Halfway up the ridge, May stopped. She looked back toward the cabin. Just once. "Will she be okay?" Silas said nothing at first. "Then she carries scars like maps." May frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked at her. "Some men carry scars like maps. They just don't tell you where the road leads until it's too late." May fell quiet. They moved again, the mountain taking them in like a secret. Behind them, a branch snapped. Not wind. Footsteps. They weren't alone. The first bullet missed them by inches. Silas threw May behind a snow-covered log before the second shot cracked through the trees. Bark exploded just above her head. The forest lit up with the chaos of sound thunder from rifle fire branches shattering the sharp snap of boots punching through icy underbrush. Silas fired once, then again, both shots deliberate, controlled. "Go," he barked, already moving. May scrambled to her feet and ran, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the gunfire. Her legs burned with cold and fear. Snow snagged at her boots. Behind her, Silas dropped to one knee, sighted, and squeezed off another round. A man screamed, short-clipped, final. Then came silence, the kind that doesn't stay quiet for long. Silas caught up to May near a ridge ledge, his coat streaked with snow breath clouding in the freezing air. "Keep moving," he said. "They had 4. I only saw 2. May nodded, chest heaving. "Why are they shooting at me? They're not," he said. "They're shooting at us." They pushed on. The trees thickened. The trail vanished beneath drifts. Every step became a gamble, ice under snow, a fall, a broken leg. But they didn't stop. Couldn't. "Where are we going?" May asked between breaths. "There's a burned-out ranger station 2 miles east," Silas said. "High ground. Defensible." "How do you know it's still there?" "Because I burned it down myself." May gave him a look, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. By the time they reached it, dusk was pulling its gray shawl over the sky. The ranger station stood like a ghost. Roof half-collapsed, chimney still, whole walls blackened with old soot. It sat on a stone rise above a narrow creek, a place built to watch, to hold out. Silas checked the perimeter, rifle in hand. May slipped inside through the broken door, every muscle shivering. It was colder here, no windbreak, no shelter from the sky. He came in a minute later, nodding once. Clear, for now. They worked fast, clearing debris, blocking the door with a fallen beam, building a small fire in the cracked hearth. The light danced against the charred walls, casting shadows like ghosts reaching out from the past. May crouched near the flames, teeth chattering. Silas took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. She started to protest. He stopped her with a look. "You'll last longer warm than I will cold," he said. She didn't argue again. After a while she whispered, "How long will it take them to find us?" "Less than a day. They know the mountain. But so do I." May's voice shook. "What if we don't make it to the marshal?" Silas didn't answer right away. Then I make sure they don't make it either." May closed her eyes. The fire popped. "Why me?" she asked. "Why go through all this for me?" Silas stared at the flames. His face was carved from silence. "Because when I left my sister behind, I told myself it was just one choice, that she'd be fine, that I'd come back." He looked at her. "I was wrong." May said nothing. He added softly, "You don't survive men like Thatcher by hiding. You survive, by choosing who you'll become when they're gone." She looked at him. "And who did you become?" He almost smiled. "No one yet. But I'm getting there." Outside, the wind rose. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. Farther off, the unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats crunched faintly over frost-bitten ground. Silas stood. "They're close." May rose too, gripping the pistol. "You said the station's defensible. It is. But we're outnumbered, outgunned. So what do we do?" He looked toward the window. "We hold." Thatcher Redbird crouched near the creek bend, squinting through the trees. Behind him, Marcus Devlin stood like a man waiting for a train he already owned. "You sure they came this way?" Devlin asked. Thatcher nodded. Tracks led straight east. 2 sets, one heavy, one light. The girl's with him. Devlin rubbed his chin. "You ever think about why she ran?" Thatcher's voice was a growl. "She didn't run. She was taken. No one gets taken up a mountain in winter without wanting to go. Thatcher spun on him. Don't you start preaching. She's mine. Devlin's eyes went cold. You'd do well to remember she's mine now. Thatcher hesitated, jaw twitching. Devlin turned away. Surround the station. Wait till dark. Smoke them out. Inside the station, Silas laid out what little ammunition they had. 6 rounds in his rifle. May's pistol had 5. We shoot to stop, not scare, he told her. Pick your shots. Wait for movement. May nodded, fingers shaking. They'll try to flank us from the left, he added. Stay on the right side window. If you see a shadow, don't ask. Shoot. She hesitated. What if I freeze, you won't? I might. Silas met her eyes. Then you shoot afraid. But you shoot, she nodded. Night fell hard. Moonlight turned the snow silver. The trees stood like silent judges. Then footsteps, slow, crunching. May's breath caught. She raised the pistol. A figure moved through the trees, close, then vanished. She didn't shoot. Silas fired once. A grunt. Silence. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from 2 sides. The station walls shook with impact. Splinters flew. May dropped flat, heart hammering. Stay low, Silas shouted. He moved like a ghost, window to doorway, then back, firing when he could, ducking when he couldn't. May saw a shadow cross the window. She didn't freeze this time. She fired. A body dropped in the snow outside. Silas looked at her, nodded once. Another shot rang out, this one louder. Then came a voice. Thatcher. May. You in there? May stood slowly, jaw clenched. Don't, Silas warned. I need to, she said. She stepped to the window. I'm here, she shouted. You're coming with me, Thatcher called back. Or I burn that place down with both of you in it. May raised the pistol again. No, she said louder now. I'm not. Girl, you don't own me. You never did. Silence. Then another gunshot. It hit the window frame just above her head. Silas pulled her back. We can't hold much longer, he said. May looked at the fire, the pistol, the thin walls. We don't have to. Silas frowned. She pointed to the oil lamp. His eyes lit with understanding. You sure? May nodded. Outside, the attackers crept closer. Inside, Silas grabbed the lamp, tore. A cloth wrapped it tight. He looked at her. Ready. She lit the cloth. Now, she said. Silas threw it hard through the broken door. The forest lit with flame. May grabbed the packs. They ran. Behind them, the fire exploded, smoke pouring up, flames catching the dry trees. Yells rang out, men scattering. Gunshots fired into nothing. But Silas and May were already gone, slipping into the dark through the creek, heading south. Toward Marshall Brant. Toward the final stand. And behind them, the fire erased the map, burned the past clean. By morning, the fire behind them had painted half the ridge in black. Smoke still curled over the trees like a warning, and snowflakes drifted down gently, trying too late to smother what had already burned. May and Silas moved fast, following the creek south through narrow switchbacks and frozen crossings, their breaths, short legs sore, but neither one willing to stop. May didn't speak much, not because she didn't have words, but because they felt like splinters in her mouth. Everything she'd held in for years was now hot and sharp and sitting just behind her teeth. Silas watched her in quiet intervals, like he was trying to decide how much of her silence was pain and how much was purpose. By the time the sun hit its highest point, they reached a narrow trail cut into the slope. Below them, the world-widened fields stitched with pine, a flat river running like steel through the trees. And at the edge of it all, perched on a bluff like it was daring the mountain to come down, stood a lonely wooden cabin with a flagpost, a smoke trail, and a dog asleep on the porch. Silas exhaled. Brant's still here. May's shoulders eased slightly. You trust him? With my last bullet, Silas said. They crossed the last mile in silence. When they reached the porch, the dog barked once, lifted its head, then flopped back down. A moment later, the cabin door opened and a tall man in a canvas duster stepped out. Marshal Hollis Brant looked like he'd been carved out of rock. His skin was dark and weathered, his gray-streaked braid falling past his shoulder. His badge hung on a leather strap across his chest, not polished, not pretty, just worn. He didn't smile, but he didn't draw either. "Grey Wolf," he said. Silas nodded. "Marshal." Brant's eyes flicked to May. She met his stare without flinching. "She with you?" he asked. "She is." Brant stepped aside. "Get in." Inside, the warmth hit like a punch. A pot of something thick simmered on the stove. The walls were lined with wanted posters, maps, rifles, and books. Everything had purpose. Nothing was wasted. Brant poured coffee into 3 tin mugs and handed one to May. She took it with both hands, fingers trembling just enough to show she hadn't stopped shaking since the ridge. Silas took a sip, then said, "Thatcher Redbird and a man named Marcus Devlin are hunting her. Hired men. Guns. Maybe worse." Brant nodded slowly. "I've heard the name Devlin. Used to run security for the Northern Lines Railroad. Got dirty when the payroll went missing. Bodies found in the river, but no charges stuck. He's got men in Ellery," Silas said. "And a list." Brant looked at May. "You're on it." "I'm not afraid of dying," May said quietly. "I just don't want to go back." "You won't," Brant said simply. "Not if I have breath left." They stayed the night. Silas slept near the door. May curled up by the hearth, eyes wide open, staring into the flames. Brant didn't sleep at all. He sat by the window rifle across his knees, watching the tree line like it owed him something. Before dawn, he stood and stretched, then stepped outside. Silas joined him. "She sleep at all?" Brant asked. "No." Brant sighed. "You're sure about bringing this here? She needs protection. And you need peace, huh?" Silas looked out at the snow-covered pines. "I don't think peace was ever meant for men like me." Brant didn't argue. "Justice doesn't ride in on a white horse. It walks in with mud on its boots and blood on its hands." Silas looked down. "She's earned better." Brant turned. "Then give her better." Inside, May had finally drifted off, her face soft for the first time in days. Her hand still gripped the pistol, but her breathing was slow. Brant studied her from the doorway. "She'll need to testify. We bring charges, we'll need more than just scars," Silas said. "She remembers everything. Then we need to move fast. I can deputize you. You'll stay close. I'll send a wire to Sheridan, request backup." "They'll come for Devlin," Brant said. "Not likely." Silas didn't flinch. "Then we handle it ourselves." By mid-morning, they were preparing defenses. Brant showed May how to reinforce the shutters. Silas checked the traps near the tree line. Brant cleaned the rifles and loaded extra rounds into canvas pouches. "We've got maybe a day," Brant said. "They'll track the fire south." May watched them move, efficient, silent, focused. Like war was just another chore. Later, Brant pulled a file from his chest and handed it to her. Inside were 3 documents. One was a statement form. The second was a wanted poster with Thatcher Redbird's name. The third was a photo. It was her, taken years ago. She stared at it for a long time. "You still her?" Brant asked. May shook her head. "No." "Good," he said. "She didn't survive. You did." That night, as the sky turned to ash, May sat beside the door polishing the pistol until it gleamed. Silas stepped beside her. Cold night for war. She didn't look up. "I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be," he said. She smiled faintly. "I'm not the same girl he tied to that fence." "No," Silas said. "You're not." And miles away in the dark tree line beyond the southern ridge, Thatcher Redbird knelt beside the smoldering ruin of the ranger station, picked up a charred beam, and spat blood into the snow. "She's mine," he whispered. Beside him, Devlin stood with arms crossed, unreadable. "We hit them at dawn," he said. "No speeches. No mercy." Thatcher grinned, teeth yellow and cracked. "Then I want the bullet." Devlin didn't smile. "You'll get the girl," he said. "But the man," Devlin added coldly, "is mine." As the two turned away, the wind howled like something ancient had just been promised blood. Back at the cabin, Brant finished writing his last note. If he didn't make it, someone needed to know what happened. He sealed the envelope, placed it in a drawer beneath his badge. He'd seen storms before. But this one wasn't weather. It was reckoning. The morning came like the slow drag of a knife. Fog thickened the trees, smothering sound and blurring the horizon. Inside the cabin, silence clung to the walls like frost. Hollis Brant stood at the window, the barrel of his rifle resting on the sill. His breath fogged the glass. He didn't wipe it clean. Behind him, May adjusted the bandolier across her chest. Her hands moved steady, precise. No more trembling. Across the room, Silas cleaned his knife for the third time in 10 minutes. Not because it needed it, but because it kept his mind from slipping too far ahead. "They're coming," Brant said quietly. May stepped up beside him. "How can you tell?" He nodded toward the line of trees. "See, that crow doesn't fly for nothing this early." Something disturbed the roost. Silas moved toward the back window. "What's the plan? We don't wait," Brant said. "They want a siege. I say we give 'em a reminder this ain't a fort, it's a bear's den." May cocked her head. "So we go out?" Brant looked at her. "You don't cage a wolf and expect it to stay calm." She smirked. "I'm not calm." Brant handed her a sawed-off shotgun. "Good. Don't aim to be." They moved fast, splitting into a V formation around the cabin. Brant took the left flank, Silas the right. May, heart pounding like thunder in her throat, moved between them, low, fast eyes sharp. They spotted the first man near the edge of the creek, crouched behind a fallen tree, rifle trained on the cabin. Silas raised a finger, then signaled. Brant moved without sound. One shot. Clean. The man dropped without a cry. May's pulse surged. Not from fear, but something else, something new. Resolve. They kept moving. Fog hugged the ground like a curse hiding bodies, but not breath. Not heat. Not the weight of boots against frozen earth. Brant whispered, 3 more. North Ridge. Close. May adjusted her grip. "Let me." He looked at her uncertain. She didn't flinch. "Let me." Brant nodded once. May slipped through the brush like she'd been born to it. The mountain didn't question her anymore. She belonged to it now, and it to her. The 3 men were clustered near a boulder, murmuring low. One smoked. Another adjusted the scope on his rifle. The third was watching the tree line, but not the right one. May stepped out from behind a pine and fired. The first shot hit the smoker in the chest. He crumpled. The second missed. The third didn't. By the time the last man turned, Silas was already behind him. Steel met throat. No sound escaped. May exhaled hard. Then again, she looked at Silas. I didn't freeze. He just nodded. They regrouped near the creek. Brant pointed up the trail. Thatcher'll come last. Devlin first. He'll want to soften us. Silas narrowed his eyes. Then we soften him back. The sun broke through for a second, lighting the fog gold. It was the kind of morning that would have been beautiful if it weren't soaked in danger. They moved again, circling around toward the east. That's when they heard it. A voice. Cold. Smooth. Confident. Marcus Devlin. I know you're watching, Marshall. Why don't we talk? Brant raised his rifle, aimed through a crack in the brush. I don't talk to men who send others to die. Devlin's voice floated through the trees. Every man dies. Not every man gets paid for it. May whispered, Can I shoot him? Not yet, Brant said. Devlin took another step into view, hands empty, coat open to show no weapons. But he wasn't alone. Two of his men flanked him, guns drawn, eyes scanning. I just want the girl, Devlin called. You give her to us and this ends. May stepped forward, voice strong. I'm not something to give. Devlin turned, spotted her. Well, now he smiled. Ain't you something? You're braver than your father gave you credit for. You don't know him, she snapped. I know the type, Devlin said. Wounded, angry, weak. May cocked the shotgun. You want to see weak, Brant whispered, now. They opened fire. The first shot took one of Devlin's men. The second forced Devlin to dive behind a log. Chaos erupted. Silas and Brant moved as one, laying cover fire while May circled wide, flanking Devlin. Gunfire tore through the woods. Trees splintered. The air filled with smoke and fury. Then silence. Devlin crawled out from the tree line, blood on his coat. Alone. He looked up and saw May standing above him, shotgun aimed. You don't have to kill me, he said. No, she replied, but I can. He laughed, coughed blood. Go ahead then. Be like us. She stared at him for a long moment, then lowered the gun. Silas stepped up beside her. He ain't worth the bullet. Devlin tried to rise. Brant pistol whipped him back to the ground. You'll face trial. May's eyes never left Devlin's. He doesn't get to vanish. No, Brant said. He gets remembered. The right way. Silas dragged him to a tree, tied him to the trunk with wire. Comfortable, he asked. Devlin didn't answer. Brant looked at May. He's done. She nodded. But he's not the last. And as they turned back toward the cabin, a distant voice cut through the woods. Thatcher, calling her name, dragging the past behind every syllable. May froze. Brant said, we go back. Fortify. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face him alone. She looked at him, eyes hard. I've never been more ready. As they moved through the fog back to the cabin, she felt something shift deep in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but ownership. This was her story now, and the mountain would remember. Not because of who she was, but because of what she chose to become when everything tried to break her. The wind picked up that afternoon, rough and restless, like even the mountain was bracing for something it didn't want to see. Snow drifted sideways now, not in flakes, but in long slashes that danced across the sky and scraped the ground clean. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked, but nobody moved. The silence between them had weight. Silas sat at the corner table, sharpening his knife with long, measured strokes. May leaned near the hearth, her back straight, the sawed-off resting on her lap like a second spine. Brant stood at the window, staring into the white blur beyond the glass, his rifle cradled but ready. They all knew he was out there. Thatcher Redbird. And he wasn't coming for a deal. He was coming for an ending. The wire Brant had sent to Sheridan still hadn't gotten a reply. Not that they expected one. Not fast enough, not far enough, not with snow like this. They were on their own. "He's close," Brant muttered. "Probably watching. Won't attack until dusk." He always liked the dark, May said, her voice level. That's when he was meanest. Silas looked up. "Then we make dusk hell for him." May didn't smile. Hell won't be far behind. They spent the next hour boarding windows, spreading ash over the porch to hear footsteps and setting traps just outside the tree-line, old hunting snares Brant kept tucked away for wolves. He figured it was fitting. Brant handed May a flask as they took a short break. She sipped, coughed at the bite of whiskey, then handed it back. "Burns less than memory," she muttered. "You're changing," Brant said, watching her. May shrugged. "Maybe I'm just getting honest." He nodded. "Good. Truth's heavier than a gun, but it's what keeps your hand steady." Later, Silas brought in Devlin, still bound, bleeding but alive. They tied him to the support beam farthest from the fire. "Didn't think you'd keep me breathing this long," Devlin said through cracked lips. "You'll live to stand trial," Brant told him. Devlin chuckled. "You think trials mean anything out here?" Silas crouched in front of him. "They do to the girl you tried to own." Devlin's smile faded. May stood nearby, arms crossed. He looked up at her. "You ever wonder what you'll be when this is over?" She didn't answer. He leaned forward as far as the wire would allow. "You won't be free. You'll be empty." "Maybe," she said. "But at least I won't be you." Outside, the trees groaned as wind pushed through them. A branch cracked and fell. Then, silence. The kind that rang in your ears like something had been ripped out of the air. Brant cocked his rifle. "He's here." They took their positions. May near the back window. Silas crouched low by the door. Brant near the front, hidden behind the stove wall with a clear shot line. The minutes dragged. Nothing moved. Then a voice cut through the wind like a bone saw. "May." She flinched. Just slightly. "I know you're in there, girl. Come out and face me. One last time." May didn't speak. "He's trying to bait you," Silas warned. "I know. I brought your favorite." Thatcher's voice went on. "Your ribbon. From when you were little. The blue one. You used to wear it when you pretended your mama wasn't dead." May shut her eyes. Silas reached out, touched her arm. "He's trying to get in your head." "I'm already in his," she said. Brant gave her a nod of approval. "Come on out, baby girl," Thatcher called, "or I start cutting pieces off that lawman of yours." A pause. Then a loud crack, the unmistakable sound of a match being struck. Brant's eyes widened. "He's got oil." They rushed to the windows. Sure enough, Thatcher stood in the clearing, a torch in one hand, a sloshing can in the other. He tossed the liquid in a wide arc across the porch boards, then smiled. "Smoke 'em out," he muttered. Silas raised his rifle. "I got the shot." May put a hand on his barrel. "Let me." Silas paused, nodded. She lifted the sawed off, aimed through the crack. Her finger hesitated. Then a shot. Thatcher staggered, dropping the torch. It caught midair, burst into flame, but landed in the snow just short of the porch. The shot had hit his shoulder, spun him halfway around. He howled, dropped to his knees. May stepped onto the porch before anyone could stop her. Snow lashed her face. Her coat billowed in the wind. She walked toward him, shotgun still raised, not trembling, not blinking. He looked up at her. Blood at the corner of his mouth, teeth bared. "You gonna kill your old man?" he rasped. May stopped just out of reach. "I don't have an old man." "That's a lie." "I made you. I fed you. You broke me." He laughed. "And look how strong you turned out." May's finger curled. "I should kill you," she said. "You should," he whispered. She paused, then turned the barrel aside and stepped back. Thatcher lunged. Before he reached her, a second shot rang out, Brant from the cabin. Thatcher collapsed in the snow, face twisted in shock. Brant stepped forward, rifle lowered. "Sometimes it ain't the bullet that kills you. It's what you say before you pull the trigger." May stared at the body, the snow already beginning to cover it. The silence that followed wasn't peace. Not yet. But it wasn't fear either. Silas joined her. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "No." "We did." Brant called from the cabin. "You better come in, weather's turning, and we've still got a snake tied to our floor." May looked up at the sky. The clouds were thinning finally. Maybe the mountain had taken what it came for, but it wasn't done yet. Justice still had to ride, and the road south hadn't been walked in a long, long time. By the next morning, the sky had cleared. The storm had broken in the night, and a hush had fallen over the mountains like the land itself was in mourning, or maybe just grateful. Thatcher Redbird's body lay beneath a pine tree now wrapped in canvas and tied with twine, waiting for the ground to thaw enough for a proper grave. Nobody rushed to dig it, not even May. Inside the cabin, warmth returned slowly. Brant brewed thick coffee. Silas patched a hole in the back wall. May sat at the table with her fingers wrapped tight around a cup, her eyes steady but distant. It was the first time she had sat without her back to a wall. "Sheridan wired back," Brant said, tapping a folded slip of paper on the table. "They'll take Devlin. Federal transport arriving in 3 days. Marshal in charge is clean. I made sure." Silas scoffed. "That man's filth. He'll try to weasel out." Brant nodded. "That's what court is for." May's voice was flat but clear. "I want to be there. When they put him in chains." "You will be," Brant promised. "You'll testify." Devlin, still tied to the beam, didn't bother to argue anymore. He'd stopped talking sometime in the night. Maybe because the cold had gotten into his bones, or maybe because he'd realized no one cared to hear what he had to say. Either way, the silence was better. Silas stepped outside to check the traps. The air was crisp, clean. A few birds had returned chirping like they hadn't witnessed death just 2 days before. Life, Silas thought, has a funny way of pretending nothing happened. May joined him minutes later, bundled in Brant's second coat. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him and looked out toward the tree line. "He's really gone," she said after a while. "Yeah," Silas replied. "He is." I thought I'd feel different. You do, she looked at him. How do you know? Because you're standing, not running. That's new. May almost smiled. Almost. I don't know where to go from here, she admitted. All I ever knew was surviving him. Now that he's dead, I don't know who I am. Silas glanced at her eyes, soft. You get to decide. That's terrifying. Good. Means it's real. They walked the perimeter together in step. When they returned, Brant had begun preparing a travel pack. You're serious about going with him? May asked, nodding toward Devlin. Brant nodded. I want eyes on every mile between here and Sheridan. And I want the judge to hear the truth from us, not just some papers. May looked down. I never told the whole truth before. Brant met her eyes. Then start now, in court. Silas crossed his arms. It's not going to be easy. He's got money, friends, men in uniforms who don't mind looking the other way. May lifted her chin. Then I'll make them look at me. Brant smiled faintly. We ride tomorrow. I've arranged for safe passage through the low valley, less open exposure. But you'll need to rest. I'll be ready, May said. That night after dinner, May sat by the fire with her journal, the same one Annie had given her weeks ago. The pages were still mostly blank, but not for long. She started writing slowly, the first lines carved like scars. He tied me to a fence when I was 12 because I spoke when I wasn't told to. He locked me in the cellar because I read a book he didn't like. He broke my mother first, then tried to do the same to me. But I'm still here. She paused, then wrote, Freedom ain't just the absence of chains, it's the choice to never wear them again. When she finished, she set the journal down and stared at the fire. Devlin stirred once in his sleep, murmured something she couldn't make out. She didn't care. Silas watched her from across the room. She didn't know it, but the strength in her now, it didn't come from him or Brant or the mountain. It came from the thing Thatcher never understood: choice. And May had finally made hers. The next morning, the cabin was quiet but alert. Bags were packed, weapons loaded. May stood in the doorway, hair tied back, scarf around her neck, pistol on her hip like she was born with it. Brant opened the front door. Wagons waiting. Silas nodded. I'll ride flank. Keep our tail clean. May stepped onto the porch, looked out one last time at the trees that had hidden her, healed her, and witnessed her rise. She exhaled slow. Ready? Brant asked. No, May said, then smiled faintly. But I'm going anyway. As the wagon rolled down the trail toward Sheridan, the mountains stood behind them, tall and silent. And somewhere deep in the woods, Annie Snowbear lit a candle, whispered a prayer, and smiled. Because she knew the girl who once trembled was now leading the storm. Truth don't need to scream, it just needs to outlive the lies. Sheridan sat at the edge of the lowlands like it had been carved there by a stubborn hand. Snow still hugged the rooftops, and the streets were packed with travelers, traders, and trouble, just the way a frontier town liked it. But when May stepped off the wagon that morning, the whole place seemed to slow. Not stop. Just notice. Brant led the way, his badge catching the light. Silas rode ahead on horseback, scouting for signs of interference. The prisoner, Marcus Devlin, was shackled and silent in the back, bruises blooming across his jaw, from where justice had begun to show its face. May walked beside the wagon, coat pulled tight against the wind, her journal tucked inside her bag. She didn't flinch at the stares. Men looked, then looked again. Some recognized Devlin and stepped back. Others recognized her somehow without ever knowing her name. Inside the courthouse, the light was sharp and clean. Fresh pine on the floors. A long table scarred by years of verdicts. A federal judge with hard eyes and a voice that sounded like gravel on steel. Marcus Devlin, the judge, began. Charged with conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful imprisonment, and bribery of federal officers. How do you plead? Not guilty, Devlin said, calm and smooth. The room buzzed. May didn't move. Brant stood and placed a stack of papers on the judge's bench. We have testimony sworn under oath, witnesses, one survivor, and a journal. The judge scanned the cover. Miss May Cutter. May stood. Her boots echoed on the hardwood as she walked to the witness stand. She took her seat, placed a hand on the Bible, and raised the other. I do, she said. What is your relationship to the defendant? The judge asked. Her jaw tightened. He bought me. The courtroom inhaled as one. Explain, the judge said. And May did. She spoke with a voice that didn't shake. Of fences and fists. Of being silenced and sold. Of Annie Snowbear's hands washing blood from her wrists. Of Silas Greywolf finding her half-frozen in the pines. Of fire and gunshots. Of standing above her father and choosing not to become him. When she paused, the judge said, Why did you come here, Miss Cutter? Because truth don't need to scream, it just needs to outlive the lies. Devlin leaned forward smug. This is all hearsay. Emotional storytelling. She's a damaged girl looking to make villains out of shadows. May turned to him slowly. I know exactly what you are. You smiled when he hurt me. You made jokes when I cried. You watched every moment of my life fall apart and saw profit. Devlin tried to laugh. You were just a mouthy girl in a broken house. What was I supposed to do, rescue you? Brant stood. You were supposed to walk away. But you didn't. You leaned in. The judge banged the gavel once. Enough. May's voice softened but didn't break. He thinks I'm small. Still. But I'm not. You may sit, the judge said. Brant called Silas next. He gave a soldier's testimony, clear, sparse, brutal. Every word backed by the burn in his eyes. He described the ambush at the station, the fires, the injuries, the way May refused to run. When he stepped down, the room stayed quiet for a long time. The judge reviewed the notes, glanced at Devlin, then back at May. I believe you, he said, but belief and proof are two rails on the same track. He turned to Brant. Marshal, is there any other physical evidence? Brant nodded. Yes, Thatcher Redbird's grave, near Ellery Ridge. Inside you'll find the blue ribbon May mentioned, and 2 ledger books, Devlin's handwriting, his seal. The judge looked to Devlin. Devlin didn't speak. The courtroom filled with tension. You think this town won't remember your silence? May asked him. That they'll forget because you're rich or white or clever with contracts. Devlin's jaw twitched. You're already forgotten, she said. And I'm just getting started. Brant handed the judge the last page of May's journal, her signature, dates, a closing line. This is what surviving looks like. The judge leaned back. This court finds sufficient cause for trial in a federal court. Until then, Marcus Devlin will remain in custody. Gasps, murmurs, applause from the back. May didn't smile. Not yet. Outside, snow had begun falling again, gentle this time, soft enough to be forgiven. Brant walked beside her. You were extraordinary in there. I was honest, she said. Same thing, he replied. Silas joined them as they stepped into the street. "Town's watching. Let them," May said. They made their way to the marshal's office. The cell for Devlin was cold, clean, final. As Brant locked the door, Devlin stared through the bars. "You think this changes anything?" May met his eyes. "No. I know it does." Later that night, as lanterns flickered in the windows and snow blanketed the town quiet, May sat alone in Brant's office. The journal was open again. She didn't write much, just 3 lines. "He tried to end me, but I began again. And this time I choose my name." Silas knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Annie's waiting. Said she's got warm bread and something close to forgiveness." May smiled. "I'll go, just let me finish one thing." She added a 4th line. "Tomorrow I speak for every girl who wasn't believed." And then she closed the book. Tomorrow would come fast, and she'd be ready. Snow still covered the streets of Sheridan, but something had shifted beneath it. Something quiet but steady, like the thaw of spring under the ice. May stood alone on the steps of the courthouse. The crowd behind her had begun to break apart. The hearing was over. Devlin would be transferred south within the week. His trial would be public, federal, and permanent. His name would no longer buy him silence. Brant waited across the street, hands in his coat pockets, hat low against the wind. Silas leaned on the hitching post beside him, watching May the way someone watches the sky for a sign it's safe to go home. May didn't move at first. She just stood there staring at the town, the same one that once would have walked past her like she was dirt. Now they looked twice. Not because she was broken, but because she wasn't. Annie Snowbear stepped up beside her, wrapped in her long wool shawl breath, visible in the cold air. "You done something rare," Annie said. May didn't respond. Annie continued. "Most folks carry their pain like a sack of stones. Quiet heavy. You turned it into a bridge." May glanced at her. "Still feels like I'm halfway across." "You are," Annie said gently. "But you're walking." They stood in silence a moment. Then May asked, "What do I do now?" Annie smiled softly. "You live. Not survive. Not run. Live." The word felt foreign on May's tongue. She'd survived for so long that life felt like something that belonged to other people. People who hadn't been tied to fences. People who hadn't had their voices stolen. But maybe now she could learn what it meant. She crossed the street toward Brant and Silas. Brant tipped his hat. Silas straightened. "It's done," she said. "No," Silas replied. "It's begun." Brant pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to her. "Letter of recommendation. Signed and sealed. If you ever want to join the Rangers officially." May raised a brow. "Me? You've done more for justice in this territory than half the men I've worked with in 20 years. She held the envelope, heart thudding. "You don't have to decide now," Brant added. "But I think the West could use someone like you, someone who knows the difference between law and justice." May nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." Brant tipped his head. "Take your time." He turned and walked off down the street, his boots crunching over packed snow. He didn't look back. Silas stayed. May looked at him. "What about you?" He shrugged. "I figure I'll head north. My people have a cabin up near Ghost Elk Ridge. Still standing last I checked. You going alone unless someone decides they're tired of cold towns and colder courtrooms?" She smiled, just a flicker. "That sounds a lot like an invitation." "It is," he said, "but only if it's your choice." She looked down the road, then back at him. "For the first time, I think it might be." He nodded. No push, just patience. They walked together through town, passing storefronts and strangers who nodded in respect. It was a small thing, but for May it felt massive. They stopped outside Annie's cottage. The chimney smoked steady, and light spilled through the windows like warmth had finally claimed its space. Annie opened the door before they knocked. "I made stew," she said. "And there's bread." May looked at Silas. "Stay." He smiled. "You kidding? I'll never say no to Annie's bread." Inside, the fire roared. The stew was thick, the bread fresh. And for the first time in what felt like years, May ate without watching the door. Later, as Silas and Annie talked in low voices, May pulled out her journal. She flipped past pages of pain-rage memory and found a blank one. She wrote, "There are people who will never know what it cost me to stand here today. They will never know the sound of rope tightening or what it feels like to scream without making a sound. But I know, and I forgive them for not knowing, because I am finally free from needing them to understand." She paused, then added, "What happened to me is part of my story, but it isn't the whole thing. I am not just a girl who survived a monster. I am a woman who walked back into the dark and dragged herself out with fire in her teeth." She closed the book, set it down, and leaned back. The silence that filled the room was soft. No dread, no tension, just breath and time. Outside, snow continued to fall, but gently now, no longer a threat. Silas stirred the fire and said, "You ever think maybe the mountain isn't cruel, just honest?" May thought about that for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "It doesn't give you what you want, just what you carry." He looked at her. "And what are you carrying now?" She smiled, not bitter, not forced. "Light." Silas leaned back in his chair. "Good. Then you won't mind lighting the way." The next morning, May packed what little she owned into a saddlebag, not because she was running, but because she was going on her terms. Annie hugged her tight at the edge of town. "You'll come back." May nodded. "I will, but I won't be the same girl." Annie's eyes shimmered. "That's the point, honey." Silas waited with the horses. He handed her the reins to a gray mare with a wild streak in her eye. "Name's Kestrel," he said. "Fast and stubborn. Figured you'd get along." May laughed. "Sounds familiar." They rode out slowly. No rush, no chase, just sky and space, and the sound of hoofbeats on snow that was no longer trying to bury them. As the trail curved, May looked back once. The town, the courthouse, the fence that once held her in. And then she turned forward. Because the road ahead wasn't easy, but it was hers now. And freedom, true freedom, wasn't a place. It was the quiet, steady promise she'd made to herself, never again, never small, never silent.